I know it's a bit late on in the day, so I won't be too long. The purpose of my presentation as we start is just to introduce you into what we're going to end up talking about in a panel format shortly with Marek and also with Julia, and that is how to do esports right in a post-COVID world. Now, the post-COVID world part, we put that there in a hopeful, as a hopeful statement, but we obviously understand that we very much are still facing the effects of COVID currently today. So, I guess getting straight into it, maybe just a little bit about who I am and what we do. So, really quickly, ESIC stands for the Esports Integrity Commission. We are a not-for-profit independent members association. Essentially, what we've managed to do over the last 6 or 7 years is unite the entire industry under one membership, one integrity structure, and we now function almost as a quasi-regulator of sorts. Our members sign on to onto our organization, and then they abide by our integrity standards and regulations. So what we've been able to do really well over the last 5-6 years is get a good grasp of how esports works globally. And I'm hoping to bring you a little bit of that. Our membership comprises of a wide range of stakeholders, and that gives us a really good insight into being able to, I guess, have some level of credibility and authority in saying this is how esports works. From governments to tournament operators to betting operators, land-based venues, we've seen it all. So when, you know, an opinion from our sense at least is at the very least anecdotal, if not backed by data or some level of observation. Now, enough about ESIC. That's not what you're here for. Forget about that for a second. Let's talk about sort of the background that we need to know. So maybe just a show of hands, maybe get some interaction going. Who here knows what esports is? Maybe just a hands up show. That's okay, yeah. I'd say maybe 15% of the people in the room put their hands up. So let's maybe do a fundamentals 101 without being overly fundamental. Now, as a matter of anecdotal reference, let's look at sort of the impact of COVID on the gaming industry generally. And when I say gaming, I speak about the gambling context. Throughout Jan to September 2020, we saw a 60% plunge in GGR here in the Philippines. Inversely though, we found that we got very busy at the Esports Integrity Commission. There were a lot of suspicious bets, a lot of match fixing activity, a lot of esports activity, especially gambling activity. We found that a lot of the traditional gaming volume ended up coming online and taking the form of esports. There was a lot of speculative betting, new punters who saw an opportunity to enter a brand new thing that they didn't really understand very well, but hey, it's something to do while you're at home. And so we saw a really large uptick in esports gambling through that period, through the COVID period. We also saw an uptick in event performance. Interestingly enough, ESL, who is a member of ours, they host this thing called the Cologne IEM Championship. And it's one of the largest events. It attracts probably about 40 to 50,000 people to a live venue. So it's quite large. Now, the really interesting thing is all the preparations were made for this event before COVID really took effect. When COVID came into effect, the event lost all of its live attendance capability. But even still, notwithstanding the loss of that live attendance, they reported the largest increase in viewership and engagement participation. That really sort of triggered a lot of different observations. One of which, of course, is this phenomenon, esports, seems to be inversely associated with impacts on the ability to attend the live event. And of course, that has a lot of bearing on what we're going to talk about today. So, the esports is a pandemic-resistant phenomenon. So, of course, we understand that the world isn't always, well, hopefully and theoretically at least, isn't always going to be stricken by a pandemic environment. However, what the pandemic has shown is that it's really important to have a diversified approach to business, especially as land-based or integrated resort venues. And so we see that esports continues to live and breathe without the need for face-to-face interaction. That's a really vital observation. It's going to premise a lot of what we're going to talk about today. We found that esports, in a lack of a situation where there was personal and interpersonal connection, continued to thrive, and people found a different way to connect through online mediums, streaming, stream chat, engaging with team viewing parties, and so on. So, for those that didn't put their hand up, you can ignore the brackets. It says because who hasn't heard of esports by now, but you can ignore those. The first thing that you need to know is the word esports is much like the word sports. Esports is an all-encompassing word, and it encompasses various different intellectual property titles. Each of these titles are owned privately by a publisher. A publisher ultimately holds the rights to how that title is used and what can and can't be done with that particular game. Esports are created almost in an unpredictable way. You can't build a game to become an esport. An esport becomes an esport by the way that the fans and the cultural community react to a particular title. So that's really interesting. And again, this is all premise for what we're going to talk about in a second. So you just see this really fan-fueled industry that is very quick to not only spot fakes and intruders, but to very quickly form opposition against them and expel them. Having that understanding is fundamental to getting esports right. The esports ecosystem is therefore quite complex. There is a very large amount of fragmented control. Everybody's trying to get a piece of the pie. And I guess the most ultimate observation from this chart that you see on the screen from Catalyst is that the publishers hold all the powers. If the publisher turns around tomorrow and says, no more esports in my game, the entire industry built upon that particular title collapses. There's no recourse. There's no, oh, please, sir, can we continue? It's all gone. And so fundamentally, you have to understand that as we talk about esports, it's not all sort of glitz and glam and it's amazing and it's largely, there is real operational risk in entering esports, not just from a doing it right perspective or what we would call executional risk, but there is underlying systemic infrastructure related risk associated with IP and property ownership. So let's talk about contextualizing that to the audience today. I was told that there was going to be a decent amount of land-based venue people here today. So can I maybe just get a show of hands who here is from land-based / IR? Yeah, okay, and online? Okay, and then the other 80% of you are from nowhere, I'm assuming? Okay, cool, no problem. Well, we'll take some guesses and hopefully we get it right for you. So let's talk about what's in a game. What I mean by the title, what's in a game, is what does it mean when we look at a particular game? We've talked about esports as an all-encompassing term. We know that esports is like the word sport, and I'm sure you can agree, a cricket fan is not the same as a football fan, right? They're very, very different. We market to them differently, we deal with them differently, and so you have to understand that each game, each title which classifies as an esports also has its own archetype. These archetypes somewhat can be similar in particular areas of demographics and so on, but oftentimes are quite distinct and different. So fundamentally, it's important to understand which archetype, which game yields the people that can drive the outcomes that you want in your integration. Certain archetypes have particular predispositions to certain target outcomes. For example, shoppers, gamblers, diners, drinkers, people who use your entertainment venues. And so to be precise in integrating esports into an operation, that's a framework understanding that you have to have. For those of you thinking about esports and sort of, probably maybe some of you don't have a decent appreciation of the scale of the phenomenon, how big it's got. This is a little bit of a case study which will preface Marek and I's discussion led by Julia in a second. I'm going to ask you a question. So Dota 2, it's one of these many titles that we talked about earlier. It's owned by a publisher called Valve. Every year, Dota 2 organizes something called the International, one of the largest tournaments in esports. Each year, the publisher releases a virtual item, and a percentage of the revenue generated from that virtual item goes towards the prize pool for the event. So I'm going to get just maybe somebody randomly shout out a number if you are brave enough. How much do you guys think was raised for the 2020 event? And I know this can backfire. Somebody could say like 300 million, and I'll be like, oh, well, it's not really that high. But let's just try it anyway. Anybody have an idea of how much was raised for the 2020 event in one title, one event?
10 million?
10 million? All right, let's take that bid. It was actually 40 million. Thanks for that 10 million low ball. 40 million was raised simply by spending habits of people engaged with that one title for one virtual item for one event. So just think about that for a second. That's one purchase decision opportunity for one event, and the volume that we had is 40 million. And you can see it's a track record. It's not just a one-off occurrence. That's a 2,401% increase from the previous year, from the founding year, I should say. So 2019 was 34 million, 2018 was 25 million, 24 million, and 20 million. So you can see, from a disposable income perspective and a spending habit perspective, this is something that is increasing with time and not decreasing. People are more and more interested in spending on things that they care about in the esports world. And just earlier in the panel that was before us, we heard about, there was one question that sort of prompted me about understanding the younger demographic that we're marketing to. And I often find that traditional marketing mechanisms fail to see things that are very well established in other areas, in other cultures, including the esports culture, where if you get people correctly motivated, you get a lot of spend out of these people. And so, having said that, frequently asked question, which will start our discussion, is how do I engage with this industry? Let's hand over to Julia.
Thank you so much, Stephen. So let's sit down in the chairs here, and I would like to welcome on stage as well Marek Suchar, the Managing Director of Odin GG. Please welcome him on stage. So, Stephen, thank you so much for that brief introduction to the topic. So I would like to kick this panel off by directing my first question to Marek, and it's, why should we care about esports?
Yeah, we'll definitely get to that part of how to engage, but first it's very good to exactly ask the question, why should we actually care about esports? There were hands coming from the online industry, there were hands coming from land-based industry. In general, there was a good bridge from the previous discussions when the panelists discussed how to actually get younger generation to their premises, how to actually engage with them. What does it mean? Because they behave differently. If you right now look at all the aspects of the industry, pretty much many times we are speaking rather about I don't know what to call it all the generations, but we don't cater that much to the younger generation, right? If you think about the thing that you have in your pocket, about the cell phone, pretty much any game must be much more entertaining than any casino, any slot game on the premises, whether it's online or offline. With that being said, also when it comes to attention span and the habits of younger generation are much different. They are much more digitally savvy, they are looking into crypto, they are less perceptive regarding the advertisement and other stuff. At the same time, they are much more engaged when it comes to online world. They pretty much live online, and many major part of their life actually happen online. What does it mean is that when it comes to TikToks, Facebooks, they communicate online, they actually consume the content online. When it comes to Twitch, as the platform for esports, when it comes to media, when it comes to all these sort of things. So what you want to actually do is, if you want to cater to this younger generation, you should go where they are going. You should present the things as they are actually consuming it, and esports is actually one of them. With that being said, when we speak, and one of the biases of esports is that usually we are speaking about the underage player that is living at the basement of his mom. He got some pocket money. He's not able to bet with us yet, and all this kind of stuff. These titles that Steven mentioned, Counter-Strike, League of Legends, Dota, they are around more than 10 years now. So basically, who played at the 18s, right now is in the late 20s, potentially starting 30s. She has a good career. They are starting a family. The important thing to realize is that who had the access to PCs 10 years ago? Whoever had that actually ended up in a much better space than the other people. So he's more digitally savvy, more influential, he's able to spend anything regarding that. With that being said, the majority of the partners that we are seeing, esports is definitely much more engaging when it comes to betting with the people around their 30s. And also there's a huge generation gap because any bettor or punter you are getting from pretty much any traditional sports is in average age of 33 plus. There are even case studies in US where, for example, NFL, you are looking at people 50, 60 plus. So of course you are looking at a completely different generation. When it comes to esports bettors, you are looking at the demographics around 25 years in average. Anything close to it is only MMA at 28. So you are looking at a huge generation gap where the LTV of those bettors will be much higher across the time because they are higher when it comes to they are higher stated when it comes to the income. They are significantly younger, and they are not that much interested in traditional sports. There is a small cross-sell across the sports, like Champions League and other stuff, the top-tier events, but at the same time, they are very into esports. And one of the reasons being for that is that also when it comes to esports, this is not just the perception that I'm actually watching the game, right, as soccer, as ice hockey, as other stuff, but actually I play the game. I have the real experience with the game because I played it myself. Right now I have family, a career, so I probably don't play anymore, but I'll still watch. I'm influential enough to bet. So my relationship with the game is much different than when it comes to other titles, where I probably never played on that pitch for 90 minutes, but when it comes to Counter-Strike, League of Legends, Dota, I have hours spent and invested into the game, and I understand very well.
Thank you. Steven, any comments, something to add?
That was excellent, comprehensive overview. I think the only thing I could say, and it's just to accentuate something you already mentioned, is I guess when we look at approaching esports from the lens of the audience here, it's important to just make sure that those biases are checked, because that's sort of fundamental to being able to engage with the subject matter at all, and make sure that you're engaging with it in a meaningful and fruitful way, a way that can yield a result.
Thank you. Well, yes, that definitely answered the question about biases and also who does it cater, right? So before we go to the next question, I would like to ask again what Steven asked in the beginning. So raise your hand if you're from the land-based industry. 2, 3, 4. Everyone in that corner? Yeah. And online? Yeah, there's less of you. Thank you. So my next question will be on land-based operations and esports. So I would say that, so my first question then to both of you is who should do it? Like where can we do it? And what would you say to someone that says, I don't know how to do it, land-based operator? Yeah.
I think who should do it, I'm going to answer it a little bit more philosophically than probably practically. I'll leave the practical side to you, but more philosophically as anyone who's willing to do it correctly and in a way that is authentic to the industry itself. I think, and that goes beyond just land-based and online, right? So what must be understood as a most fundamental precursor to even considering it philosophically is you have to be willing to do it operationally correct. You need to be able to engage with the industry in a way that they want to be engaged with. And I know that sounds like a very common sense thing, but I'll give you a practical example of how it isn't necessarily always a common sense thing. Where this is lost is in the nuance and within operations, when you're executing on an esports opportunity, what I often find with a lot of different operators is they forget that authenticity element within the nuance of the execution plan. Like, if we add the word esports at the end of our venue name, that's sufficient. And of course, we know that, I've obviously picked a very operational particular detail, but in that particular detail, they've missed the mark. What we've seen works time and time again is when an organization that wants to enter the esports industry creates an entire strategy and integrates an entire strategy around esports specifically, including a complete identity, operational plan, all that sort of stuff that is unique and different and specifically tailored towards the industry. But that's kind of on sort of more the fundamental level. Marek?
Yeah, I'll be just bridging from the previous panel because they were really the clues leading to this to some extent. There was a discussion about metaverse, and there were projections that probably it can be something that can happen in 10 years' time. I personally checked on that panel. iPhone was released in 2007. Before that, there was no iPhone. This is 15 years. And imagine what happened in those 15 years when it comes to not just our industry, but pretty much any industry, and this is heading. So pretty much making any projections when it comes to technology of 5 years and beyond is very, very tricky these days. With that being said, I guess for online, I'll touch it slightly, but mostly we might touch the topic why actually do the esports for offline. Recently, ESL Cologne happened, which is a competition in Counter-Strike, which is a first-person shooter. The premise where it happened, it can get in there something close to 20,000 people. It was sold out. People came all across the world to actually see that things in action. So watch their favorite teams playing on the screens, with them in booths and actually playing. As Steven correctly pointed out, esports is by its nature digital. It is fully online, so that's why it was able to sustain the pandemic, because even when everything was shut down, it was able to sustain. At the same time, it hurt the tournament organizers, it hurt the teams, because it is something else to go to the venue and fight for your prize, because you are esports athlete anyway, but at the same time, it was able to sustain. Nevertheless, esports fans are not just some weirds that are sitting at their homes and they do not want to cheer for their teams. It is same, and I would recommend anybody to go to an esports, even if they are actually thinking about esports, if they want to understand it more, to go to an esports event. You will see the similar passion as you can expect at any soccer match, any cricket match, any sports match. As I told you, so this event there were almost 20,000 people there. Similarly, the international 2 years ago, when actually it was public, the tickets were sold out within minutes. Again, for the venue where almost 10,000 people were able to fit in. Why am I saying this? Even though esports fans mostly work online, they want to meet, and there is a huge potential for cross-sell. So if you, as land-based casinos, are actually looking for international travelers, if you are looking for the way of diversification, esports is definitely something that you should take a look at. In the upcoming weeks/months, there will be ESL. Again, ESL is one of the largest organizers of esports events globally, actually the largest one. And they will be having a tournament major in Malaysia in cooperation with Genting, with Esports World. So this is also one of the ways how both Genting as well as some of the larger operators in US we are speaking to. It is all about how to attract the younger generation to your premises, how to attract international travelers. Esports is global. There is no distinction whether the viewers are coming from this and that region. There are certain preferences for certain titles, because esports is not just one thing, but there are certain preferences in certain regions. But with that being said, this is the way how you can differentiate yourself. What did it bring is that the people will come, they will enjoy the event, there's other opportunities to cross-sell, there's a potential for brand recognition. So it is not only that esports is happening online, you can serve those audience in the premises as well. With that being said, I guess what will come to your mind immediately is the topic of underage. I addressed it to some extent already. At the same time, casinos can actually become a local hubs for local competitions where the people can meet, greet, play, and essentially this is where the entire industry is heading. It is not the way that casinos should be necessarily perceived as a place for betting, but as a place for entertainment. So essentially, if you build it the way that we are here to entertain you, come and join us, and eventually, if you want to place a bet, sure you can. But if you want to entertain, definitely this is the way to go.
Thank you. And apparently it's a great way to bring the tourists back, which is what we've also been talking about yesterday mostly, but also today a little bit. We touched that earlier. So my next question is, how do you cater your gamers at the venue? What is a successful mix, and what should we think about?
I think fundamentally that starts with removing the bias. First step, remove the bias, throw it in the bin. Then it becomes this process of understanding the gamer. Oftentimes organizations perceive that they, for some reason, have the internal expertise to understand the gamer because they've done, they've done their business successfully, they've conducted themselves successfully over a period of time. This is a different species entirely. And so in order to understand gamers, you have to use gamers to understand gamers. You cannot understand a gamer outside of that paradigm. Everybody that has tried, I can say completely confidently and without fail, has built something entirely unusable and entirely rejected by the industry and by the stakeholders that they're seeking to attract. So first step, throw away the bias. Second step, get a gamer on your staff. Every single entity that has entered the esports field that I have seen do it successfully is fundamentally at least made up of a majority of gamers, or they've brought on a particular set of gamers with that skill set or expertise that they need in order to build out the product for them. A good example, that applies both land-based and online. And then secondarily, generally speaking, this involves some sort of space or venue. Again, if you have never been to an esports event, you cannot understand how to build an esports friendly space. There's no way. You might think it's like 87 screens per square meter, but it's not that at all. In fact, gamers have very particular taste in terms of look, feel, and what they want from a space in order for them to want to engage with it repeatedly. Engage with it on a regular basis, come back every single time that you guys have an event or whatever it may be. So I think from a bias, staffing, and venue construction perspective, it needs to be gamer-inspired, gamer-led, gamer-driven all the way through, and definitely not something that is within the internal wheelhouse of many traditional businesses at the present time, at the very least.
Absolutely. Also to touch point, right? What is the actually target audience we are speaking about? League of Legends has globally 100 million players. These are the players right now that are engaging with the game pretty much daily or at least monthly. Many of those, as I mentioned, play the game, but right now are not playing the game anymore, but they might be still watching, so the audience is actually even bigger. When it comes to Dota 2, we are speaking about roughly 10 million players. Actually, Philippines is one of the biggest regions when it comes to Dota 2, like when it comes to engagement of the fans and other things. And then we have Counter-Strike, where Valve doesn't necessarily share the exact information, but I would suspect it's something 10 to 20 million players engaging with the game relatively every month. With that being said, this is the audience. Exactly as pointed out, you will not cut the slack with speaking to those fans the way as you speak to soccer fans, as you speak to basketball fans. This is not the way. There are certain memes, there are certain things in the game that these people will listen to, so you should cater to them in the same language as they are used to. What I would probably suggest as a really very minor, low-cost exploration of the things, there will be the International at the end of October. It will happen in Singapore. You don't need to organize the event necessarily in Philippines, but at the same time, what you can try is to organize a viewing event for the International in your premises in casinos. People can come, they don't need to necessarily bet. They can just come, throw in something, like free beers or third beers for free if you have a party of more than 20 something to them. So you will cater to them, come and watch TI with us, come with your parties and actually show them the big screens and they can actually cheer for their favorite teams. This can be relatively low cost. And if you do it right, this should definitely bring a lot of traffic to your premises. Again, it's something you can differentiate, you can get the people in, and you can entertain them. Not necessarily let them bet, but entertain them, so essentially they can become your clients.
Yeah, it's a really good point. A lot of venues and a lot of venues consider that an esports space needs to have like so many computers. I went to one in Singapore that I gave some advice on, but then the advice was ignored. And what they did, they ended up having all these screens that were very low frequency screens. So there was a lot of input lag and consoles, not PCs. And so, but they had like 80 of them in the space. And so not understanding that gamers need high frequency screens because they have to have a high refresh rate so that you can get your reaction time can be mirrored by the game, for example. These little intricacies or the particular peripheral sets that are used in tournaments which wants to get into the venue and no consoles, for example, as a generality. These things got made, were wrong in the venue, but what was even further incorrect was the presumption that the space needs to be a competitive gaming space. So we talked about biased, gamer-led venue build, but the next thing, of course, which Marek touched on just now, is events. So what do we actually use this engagement for? And it's not throwing multi-million-dollar prize pool events. Absolutely not. There's a whole variety of different engagement mechanisms that you can do, and Marek pointed out a very viable, low-cost, low-entry point method, which is the viewing party methodology. People want to come together to watch something virtually. It's very weird, but they do it. And the reason why they do it is because there are team allegiances, much like in soccer, much like in golf or in any other sport. People want to come together to watch an event because they're a particular person, there's a particular personality, there's a particular team that they are absolutely crazy about, and they want to be able to celebrate that. Now, for those that are, and it's a great way to sort of establish your foothold as a local premises that is friendly to that demographic and that industry, and it creates essentially what the aim of the entry point is to create that home for that industry in your local demographic, and then after that you can evolve into the more sort of international play, which is to start pitching for work from the organizers and such.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost guaranteed that within a couple of months, starting mid-October till the end of October, there will be couple of players from Philippines that will be battling for 40 million prize pool. This is the entire prize pool, so they will receive as a team something around 10 to 20 million. They will be fighting for it. So it will be very, very sort of strange for not the others to support him. Specifically, there's a huge community of Dota 2 fans in Philippines. So it is just to make it creative, to make it really, this can be really low cost, just to try it. Come and support our players on the international. We will provide you all the entertainment that we as casino can create. And this can be really something that you can see yourself then, because they will be coming to your premises and they will be cheering for their own players to actually win the tournament.
Yeah, exactly. And that the whole premise of that is we're bringing in people into a place off of somebody else's marketing dollar, right? The international is the thing that is marketed, and we are deriving benefit from the existing momentum within an external cost center. That's basically what it is, fundamentally. And so, very similarly, you can extend that premise to other things, like bringing in community personalities, like streamers, content creators, building spaces, shared spaces that they can use within the venue to be like, I'm broadcasting from XYZ place, and my 10 million following, you should come check this out, meet me here, we have a meet and greet, and so on. So there are so many different versatile options. So most people's perception of, let's do a 300,000 tournament sponsored by this person to bring in some people, not necessary at all. In fact, sometimes harmful.
And to some extent also to support the argument that I just made, recently there was a Riyadh Masters for 4 million prize pool, because also when it comes to Saudis, they are extremely interested investing into the esports. They had bought ESL and Faceit, put it under the one group, Savvy Group. So they are also looking at it from the entertainment perspective. What's the next big thing? And if you right now speak to your nephews, speak to your sons, daughters, they are not following necessarily sports, but they are playing. And because they are players, they will eventually become viewers, and some of them will eventually become bettors. So this is younger generation that is just being created. We've had those games around for more than a decade. So we are already at that stage. It's just going to become bigger, bigger, and bigger. Also, to give you some figures, we many times, and right now I'll be speaking to online part as well, what we are seeing is that many of the online books are thinking about the esports. Okay, the topic has been around for quite some time, 5, 7, 10 years, and at the same time we are not seeing it in our sports books, so why should we actually care, right? But you have the examples from Betway, Verimatch, Pinnacle, all of them are saying this can be a significant part of our sports book already, like top 5 sports, at least 5% of our volume. But this is the combination of two things pretty much, having a solid product and having a proper communication. If somebody goes to an old-fashioned sports book with crappy solution for esports, why would those people actually first come because of the marketing communication and then stay because of the low-quality product, right? They want to go somewhere else. So if you have the right product, right marketing I wouldn't call it marketing communication, I would rather call it the communication catering to that audience, right, as we discussed. So if you had those, we are already seeing the outcomes of that. But then, yes, Betway, Pinnacles, Perimatches, all of them can say, yes, esports is a significant part of our portfolio, we are going to invest more, and they're actually investing. But at the same time, you have the rest, where it is a vicious cycle. I have a very low volume in sports. I'm not going to invest. Why should I? In a year, you will be in the same situation. So you will never crack that because those people will not come to you. They don't have a reason why to come. They can go somewhere else and they will go somewhere else.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience? Then, we have a question. That's
perfect.
Great.
We have a question.
Sorry. Hey, there we go. Hey guys, excellent presentation. Thank you for that. I've been following esports for quite a few years now, and it's just growing, growing, growing. And I think that we ignore it at our peril. Our industry will ignore it and will continue to ignore it, particularly the online industry that I'm part of, because we don't get it. We don't have gamers. I said 10 million when you asked your question, Dan. Ethan, sorry. Because that's what my kid put on the credit card, participating in that stuff. But it's very, very hard for us in the industry, land-based, with my limited experience in land-based, but with a lot of experience in online, to provide the product, to provide the player journeys, to provide the atmosphere and just the whole experience that the esports participants are thriving for and want. So what we do is, we just try to tack it on our sports book, as you said, and that sucks. That doesn't work. Pinnacle does a good job of it, pretty much, but they're about it. Maybe PMI as well. So there's a couple of people that do it well. But even a bigger obstacle for us here in the Philippines is PAGCOR won't even let us go there and start betting on esports. So we can't even do the conventional stuff. So if you could talk to Dan Celioni about that, or anybody from PAGCOR, it would be interesting to understand why that's the case. I'm sure that we'll try it and disappoint and fail, but we will eventually get it. We just need to have that PAGCOR approval.
Yeah, to that point, that is a discussion that's currently happening between us and PAGCOR. So that is a topic on the table. We've been very successful with those discussions globally with various other regulators, so I'm fairly, I wouldn't say confident, but I'm optimistic.
I had similar discussion recently in the US as well, because the perception is also that even though many of the states are already regulated when it comes to sports betting, they are not necessarily regulated when it comes to esports, so they carry that aside. So it's like probably 1/3 or one half of the states where you can bet on sports, you can't yet bet on esports. So I absolutely hear you. At the same time, I'm not a regulator. It's good that Steven is having this kind of discussion, or ESIC is having that kind of discussions. What I would suggest, try to just show Pecor that this has a lot of potential by the examples that I told you. People can come, people can enjoy, people can be entertained. They won't be able to bet because of the regulatory stuff. But at the same time, frankly speaking, they can probably go back home and they can bet online, right? Because many times, and this is what I'm telling to all the regulators, even though you don't allow esports to be bet on in your jurisdiction, it is bet on eventually, just not with the legal books, but with the illegal books. And this is the topic with all the time across the board in the US, in the Asia, so this is the topic, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, on that, if there's anybody in the room that is interested in that happening in the Philippines, just find me afterwards and give me your card, because we will have a stage of public consultation with the internal consultancy piece as well. And as we were saying earlier, like with the other jurisdictions that we've done it with, like it's been as formal as a full-on committee process to get something enshrined in legislation, all the way through as casual as a particular state, I won't name them, in the US, calling me on Zoom and opening a Word document of an amendment to a piece of legislation and saying, hey, does this read right for esports? And we're just sitting there editing the law on Word before it goes up to be submitted. So it's a very robust discussion, and it depends on the particular sensitivities of every jurisdiction, but definitely something that is progressing always.
Thank you. So I'm guessing that the biggest concern is integrity from the, is one of the big concerns the integrity concerns?
I think it's less integrity specifically, and more it's a fear of the unknown.
Okay.
I think so, yeah, because a lot of regulators don't understand it. They don't understand how to control it. In a very similar sense, almost to, it's a similar sense to cryptocurrency sort of thing. Many regulators don't understand it, or how to regulate it, and how to bring it into a confine in a construct that is catered to more traditional sports, especially because of the digital nature of esports, right? Like, you can have a live feed from a game that has odds offered on it in a black market area, and just completely undermine the integrity of the entire tournament that is playing in a different way, with all the data mechanisms, with all of the data attributes that you wouldn't normally get in esports, in traditional sports. So it's just that fear of the incompatibility with traditional formats that drives a lot of the resistance. But as Marek said, if you're scared of it, doesn't mean it's not there.
Thank you. My last question before we go for lunch is though on integrity. So I would like to know, where is it heading? What are the key trends, and what are the mitigations? Marek, do you want to start?
Yeah, so there are two trends that are basically offsetting each other. Esports is becoming larger and larger, so it's becoming more and more professional, and the professional players are actually motivated by the prize pools, by the entire ecosystem around it, so there is less concern about the integrity. At the same time, because the events are bigger, there is much more volume, the liability is growing across the ecosystem, there is much higher motivation for the guys that want to actually cheat, right? So there is much more motivations of those ones that want to match fix or cause match fixing to actually do it. So this trend goes in opposite direction, but at the same time we are seeing less and less activity that is actually happening, and usually you have like tier 1 tournaments, tier 2, tier 3s, so you need to be more careful in tier 3 tournaments, like smaller tournaments where the prize pool can be about $1,000, right? So all you can win is $1,000, but if you bet you can win $5,000. So of course there is a certain level of potential motivation to do it. This is happening right now. At the same time, as we addressed, the legalization definitely helps the integrity, because then you can bring all that volume up to the light, and you can analyze a certain trends. So you're able to see, okay, it was that tournament, it was that team, while if all of those happens on the black market, there is not that much of a motivation to actually do this, right? So there are certain trends in this. At the same time, we as Odin GG, we work with ESIC, so we are reporting our activity. We are also receiving the information from the ESIC network about a certain events. So I would be lying if I don't say that we have a quite extensive blacklist when it comes to both tournaments as well as teams. But at the same time, the industry will to some extent be self-regulated in a way that our partners, the bookmakers that we work with, they are essentially coming to us saying, we want to sponsor that and that tournament. Shall we do it? And we are saying yes, no, because we've seen the activity in the past. On the tournament level, we are going to speak to the tournament organizer. These are the teams listed that we want to actually invite. Shall we invite all of them, or we don't want to invite some of them? And we are telling them, these two you should drop. So essentially, the industry will go, and from the betting angle, betting is one of the top sponsors, one of the top 3 for esports. So definitely, if we are as industry are providing a certain feedback, that feedback will be listened to. So we have even a say in terms of governing this integrity, and similarly as ESIC, when they sign more and more partners reporting the activity, we as Odin GG, we sign more and more partners when it comes to the network. The more activity we are seeing, so the better for us to understand whether integrity might be questionable or whether integrity is upheld.
Really good summary. And I think the only point I can add to it is what we're seeing is with the increasing professionalism is an increased level of organized crime, like a drastic increase. The most recent statistic for us was 240% year on year from this year to the year before, increase in organized crime and related suspicious betting and match fixing activity. And so we end up in a situation where a lot of our investigations into suspicious betting or match fixing ends up entwined with law enforcement. So I'm not sure, probably nobody here knows, but we had 10 arrests in Victoria for match fixing about a year and a half ago, I believe. A further 3 arrests a year ago, and then a class of 35 organized criminals currently under investigation in a joint operation between us and the FBI at the moment. So we end up with a large volume of law enforcement activity as well with this increased professionalization. What the professionalization does is it makes tier 1 super high up, and then it makes the gap really large. And that gap is where the problem is, because the lower you are in that gap, the more incentive you have to engage in suspicious activity and to engage with organized crime as well, because the money's not enough in that situation. So that's definitely a key integrity and market risk.
Thank you so much. We're out of time. Please, a big applause to the panel.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.